My name is Iris Tane, and the night I turned 18, my father pulled me aside at my birthday party and whispered, "When this is over, you're going to sign some papers for Uncle Wade." Just a formality. I smiled, I nodded. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened my laptop, and made sure my entire inheritance was protected behind an irrevocable trust they could not touch. The next morning, my parents and my uncle found out the cabin, the savings, the investments, all of it, had been legally out of their reach for years. My dad went white. My uncle, who had already signed a deal to sell property he never owned, called a lawyer. And if you think the worst part was the money, it wasn't. The worst part was realizing my grandparents had seen this coming long before I did. To explain that, I have to take you back. When I was 12, my grandfather, Harold T. Main, started bringing me to the family cabin at Cedar Lake. It sat back from the water under a ring of white pines, with a sagging porch, a stubborn screen door, and the kind of smell old wood carries when it has held decades of summers inside it. Grandpa taught me how to replace fence posts, check wood for rot, patch leaks before they spread. Grandma Vivian kept iced tea on the table and books on the shelves sorted by color because, as she said, it made the room feel warmer. One evening, after we spent the day fixing the south fence, Grandpa wiped the sawdust off his hands and told me, "This cabin stays in the family. But family isn't always blood, Iris. Family is whoever shows up." At 12, I thought he was being poetic. He wasn't. Back home, the cabin was never talked about like a home. My dad, Greg, talked about it like an underperforming asset: taxes, maintenance, resale value. My mother, Denise, agreed with whatever sounded practical. My younger sister Kelsey was still the center of the household then, younger, easier, brighter in their eyes. I was the one who noticed things. Like the development flyer I found half hidden on the kitchen counter when I was 12. Lakefront lots, premium prices, now acquiring. Someone had already started measuring my grandparents' home in dollar signs. My grandfather died when I was 14. At the reception after the funeral, I saw my father and his brother Wade standing by the dessert table with a folder between them. I heard Wade say, "We should move on this before probate gets complicated." They were talking about the cabin before the funeral flowers were gone. 2 years later, my grandmother got sick. Near the end, she held my hand and whispered, "The cabin is yours, Iris. Don't let them take it." I promised her. That same night, after her funeral, I heard my father say with relief, "Now we can finally sort out the property." That was the moment something shifted in me. My grandmother's death felt like grief to me. To them, it felt like clearance. From 16 to nearly 18, I went to the cabin almost every weekend. I patched screens, replaced weather stripping, swept pine needles off the roof, cleaned closets, kept the place alive. At home, my father and uncle started calling it the family property, like if they said it often enough, it would become true. Then one afternoon, while cleaning a hall closet at the cabin, I found an envelope with my name on it in Grandma Vivian's handwriting. Inside was a business card. Margaret Caldwell, attorney at law. Tamain Family Trust. I kept it. 3 months before my 18th birthday, Margaret called me first. She asked me to meet her alone. I went to her office downtown that Saturday, and she opened a folder and changed my life in one sentence. "Your grandparents established an irrevocable trust 6 years ago," she said. "The cabin, a savings account, and an investment portfolio, approximately $2.1 million total, were transferred into it while they were still alive. You are the sole beneficiary." I just stared at her. My grandparents had not left the cabin to my father, or to Uncle Wade, or to the family. They had moved everything out of reach years earlier, legally, quietly, permanently. Margaret slid the trust summary across the desk and told me the title to the cabin had already been recorded under the trust 6 years ago. It had never entered probate. My father and uncle had no claim. Then she told me one more thing. Someone had recently been making inquiries at the county recorder's office about the cabin title. After that, I started listening more carefully. The next Sunday, Wade came for dinner. Later, he and my dad went into the garage. I stood near the cracked open door and heard Wade say, "I already signed the purchase agreement with Ridgeline for $450, but we need the title clean before closing." My heart stopped. He had already signed a deal to sell the cabin. My father asked, "What about Iris?" Wade answered instantly, "She's 17. She can't do anything. By the time she's 18, the sale will be through. We'll give her 50 grand for college. She should be grateful." 50,000. That was the price they had put on my silence. I texted Margaret 2 words. "They're accelerating." She told me to come in Saturday. That meeting became a battle plan. The title was already safe under the trust, But if Wade tried to file false paperwork, he could create a legal mess that tied the property up for months or longer. Margaret told me the moment I turned 18, I could formally accept my role as beneficiary. The next morning, she would file a lis pendens, a public notice of legal interest, to freeze the title and block any fraudulent transfer. All I had to do was wait. That was harder than it sounds. My dad suddenly decided to throw me a big 18th birthday party. My mom sat me down on the couch and, in her soft, reasonable voice, explained that the cabin was expensive to maintain, that my father's business was struggling, that selling it could help the whole family. My uncle showed up in the driveway 2 days later and offered me $50,000 like he was doing me a favor. I asked him whose name was on the deed. His smile twitched. That told me everything. The night before my birthday, I drove to Cedar Lake alone. I sat on the porch in the chair next to the one Grandpa used to sit in and read every document Margaret had sent me. Acceptance of successor beneficiary. Trust summary. Asset confirmations. Everything flagged and ready for my signature. At midnight, I signed. At 12:03 a.m., I was 18 years old, and legally, fully, the beneficiary of the T-Main Family Irrevocable Trust. While I was signing, Wade was printing a quitclaim deed and getting ready to file it the next morning. He had also signed a purchase agreement with Ridgeline Development for $450,000, with a penalty clause that would cost him $45,000 if he failed to deliver clean title. He had gambled nearly $500,000 on land he never owned. He just didn't know it yet. The next afternoon, my birthday party filled the living room with neighbors, church friends, my father's business contacts, and even Nora Beckett from next door to the cabin. There were balloons, cake, cheap paper plates, and smiles stretched over something rotten. My father stood by the cake table, tapped his glass, and announced that our family had some exciting plans for the future. Then he said it. He told the room we had decided to sell the Cedar Lake cabin to secure everyone's future. We. He looked straight at me and asked, "Right, Iris?" The whole room went quiet. I set down my fork and said, "I never agreed to sell the cabin, Dad." His smile stayed on his face, but his jaw tightened. Wade stepped in and said this wasn't the time. I looked at him and said, "You're right. The time is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning." That ended the party. After the guests left, the masks came off. My mother accused me of betraying the family. My father sat at the kitchen table and told me what was going to happen. Wade and Greg would go to the county office in the morning, file the paperwork, sell the cabin, and give me my fair share. I asked what my share was. $50,000. Then my father said if I fought this, I was on my own. No more help with college. No more living under his roof. On my 18th birthday, my father threatened to throw me out for refusing to hand over a property that was legally mine. I went upstairs and waited. At 8 a.m. the next morning, Margaret Caldwell walked into the county recorder's office and filed the trust documents and the lis pendens against the Cedar Lake property. At 8:14 she called me. "It's done," she said. "Whatever they bring in will be rejected." At 9:05, Wade walked into that same office with his quitclaim deed and his confident handshake. The clerk pulled up the parcel number, checked the screen, and told him she could not record the document. The property had been held by the T-Main Family Irrevocable Trust since 2020. A lis pendens had been filed that morning. The chain of title was clear. His deed did not match ownership. Wade insisted there was no trust. My father said their parents had never mentioned one. The clerk told them to speak with the trustee listed on the filing. Margaret Caldwell. The same name they had found on the business card in my bag. My father called me from the parking lot a few minutes later, furious, shaking, asking what I had done. I told him the truth. I accepted what Grandpa and Grandma left me. He said it was his parents' property. And for the first time in my life, I said the thing that had been waiting there for years. They chose to leave it to me, not because they didn't love you, Dad, because they didn't trust you with it. He hung up. Then Ridgeline Development called me. Their representative explained that they had a purchase agreement with Wade for the cabin. I told him Wade had never owned the property and never had authority to sell it. Within hours, Ridgeline was pursuing Wade for breach of contract, the $45,000 penalty, and damages. Then Margaret called again with something worse. The notary's stamp on Wade's quitclaim deed did not match any registered notary in the county. It looked forged. My uncle had not just tried to steal the cabin. He may have committed a crime trying to do it. That afternoon, my father came home looking like someone had hollowed him out from the inside. He sat at the table and admitted the truth at last. His business was collapsing. He owed the bank $180,000. The cabin had been their escape plan. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. But desperation does not create ownership. My mother tried saying Harold and Vivian were old, emotional, not thinking clearly. I reminded her they had hired a lawyer and built the trust 6 years before either of them died. My father said he would contest the trust. Margaret, who I had already called, was on speaker. She told him calmly that contesting a properly established irrevocable trust would cost him more than the property was worth and go nowhere. For the first time, I saw recognition in his face. Not anger. Recognition. Over the next few weeks, the consequences spread. Ridgeline sued Wade. The forged notary stamp triggered a referral. His real estate license was suspended. Small-town gossip did what gossip always does. People didn't know every detail, but they knew enough. Harold T. Maine's sons had tried to sell his cabin. His granddaughter stopped them. My father never contested the trust. He sold the store at a loss and barely saved the house. My mother went back to work. My uncle took out a personal loan to settle the penalty with Ridgeline. The criminal review over the forged notary stamp was still hanging over him. And me? I drove back to Cedar Lake. I unlocked the door with the same key Grandpa had given me years earlier. The cabin smelled the same: pine, old books, sun-warmed wood. In the desk drawer by the window, there was a letter from Grandpa that Margaret had told me about. He wrote that he loved his sons, but they never understood the difference between something that has value and something that is valuable. He said he chose me because I was the one who asked whether the roof needed patching before I ever asked what the place was worth. The last line said, "Take care of it. It took care of you first." Later, Margaret told me my grandparents had also set aside a separate educational fund for me, $50,000, now grown to a little over 58. The exact number my father and uncle had offered me as my share. My grandparents had already planned that too. I enrolled at Ridgemont Community College, environmental science with a minor in forestry. I used the cabin address on my forms. For the first time in my life, writing where I lived felt honest. Eventually, I met my parents in a coffee shop and told them the cabin was not for sale, not now, not ever. I told them I was not cutting them out of my life, but if we were going to have any relationship at all, it had to be built on respect, not guilt, not money, not entitlement. My father said he didn't know how to fix it. I told him he didn't have to fix it that day. My sister Kelsey came to the cabin one Sunday with a pizza box and an apology she didn't owe me. We sat on the porch and watched the lake. We didn't talk about lawsuits or forged papers or trust law. We talked about school, the heron in the shallows, whether the dock needed new planks that summer. That was when I realized the cabin had done more than protect a piece of property. It had protected a promise. And it had made room for something new to begin. I didn't win against my family. There's no victory in being forced to defend yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you. But I kept my promise. I stood on something solid. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly why my grandparents had planned all of this so quietly. They saw the storm before I did. They built the shelter before I knew I would need one. And when the time came, all I had to do was show up, sign the paper, and keep the promise.